Hello, everybody. Welcome to Women Together. My name is Antoinette Klatzky. It's wonderful to be together today. I feel bright today, and I just want to share that with you all. And part of that is because there's so much snow that it's just reflecting on my face. But I also just want to share that with you all this morning. So as we get started, it would be great to just have us in the chat say hello. Happy Groundhog Day to those of us in the US. And we can just say hello in the chat. So if you have the chat function, you can click on the chat button at the bottom of your screen if you're on a computer and just type directly in, say a little hello and where you're coming from. I am in Cortland Manor, New York, standing close to the Hudson River, north of New York City, and just survived the snowstorm. But I did speak to friends this morning in Western Australia and holding Perth and the community that's experiencing wildfires there today. And just knowing that we're kind of on, in wherever we are, we're on maybe on opposite ends of the spectrum, whether it's planetary or otherwise, but that we come here together today from a lot of different places and spaces and maybe temperatures and feeling places. So just acknowledging Nyack right across the river, snowed in as well. Norfolk, Virginia, Winchester, Massachusetts, LA, happy earlier morning to you. Boulder, Colorado, Reading, Pennsylvania, Falls Church, Virginia, Virginia Beach, Brooklyn, Wine Country, California, Toronto. Oh, Eileen, land of the Tongva, she says. From beautiful southern Florida, snowy New Jersey, Philadelphia, Center City, Maria from Connecticut, New Berlin, Wisconsin. Wow. Gigliola from Italy. Wonderful to hear. Well, you hear us, we see you. No, you see us, and we can hear you. Maybe you can chime in later. Wonderful. Paula and from Manchester by the Sea. So we're covering the United States pretty heavily and have some visitors also from different parts of the world. So it's wonderful to be all together in this Women Together space, which many of you are familiar faces. A warm welcome back to our connection each week, and a warm welcome to those of you who may be newcomers. I'm just going through the gallery. I love going on gallery view and saying hello and getting to see so many of us joining together. We have been joining together week after week after week, and part of that has been pandemic related. But before that, we were coming together at the Eileen Fisher headquarters in Irvington, New York, both digitally and in person. And we were connecting with each other and really just finding ways to, Eileen Fisher is a clothing designer, and finding ways to kind of go beyond the clothing. And that means really going deeper into a part of ourselves that not only allows us to feel free in our bodies, but feel free in ourselves. So that's really, there are so many different ways to do that. There's so many different ways into realignment or reconnect with ourselves. And what that gives us the freedom and power to do in our own lives and in the world and in our communities can be really powerful. So there's a lot of different ways that we might use these practices, but the reality is that there's a shift that we look for within ourselves. So that's what we're here for. And I know that many of us come just to realign and reconnect with each other. Many of us have started to connect with friends and have become friends in our small group conversations. And the way that this session will work is that I will share a few tiny practices. So these are ways that instead of going to a retreat or going out somewhere in the world to find some sort of inner peace, we can maybe find it in our own space, either our home or wherever we may find ourselves, with a tiny practice. And it's a way to just kind of go inside for a quick moment and just land and then come back. And there are a few different tiny practices and ways in. Often we bring in different teachers, and we're setting up a lineup for the spring to bring others in and continue to kind of feed our community with these practices. And so we'll do a few of those today, and then we will do the best part of Women Together Connect, which is connecting with each other and really turning to one another and doing the practices and listening to each other, talking with one another, sharing what needs to be heard. So wonderful. So that's the plan for today, for the rest of our hour together. The first thing we'll do is just land in a moment of stillness. So we can get both feet on the ground for our first tiny practice. And just exhale everything out completely. Exhaling anything that may have come before this moment. Inhaling anything that you need. Just being fully here in this body, in this place, at this time, connected with our feet on the earth, connected by our hearts, connected by the sky above each of us. And I'll ring the sound of the singing bowl to bring us into this moment of stillness, and I'll ring the bell to bring us back again. Thanks, everyone. Wonderful. I often say that we could just sit together for this full hour and accomplish what we set out to do. So with that in mind, I will talk a little bit and invite us to share more in the chat. So the question that I have for you is, what brings us here today? What brings each of you here today? The conversation topic that we put out there in the world is about generous listening. And this is something we've talked about time and time again, but there have been a couple of requests to kind of go back to the basics. And generous listening is one of those core concepts that we know well, but sometimes lose our practice of. And I was also reading recently, there's an article which I can try and post in our Women Together conversation space. It's from the Greater Good Science Center. It came out towards the end of January. And it says, "Can deep listening heal our divisions?" And I thought that was, wow, what a time to go back to generous listening and really what that can mean for ourselves, for our inner space, and healing, the divides within ourselves, of course, but then also taking that out in the world. And can this form of listening actually heal the divides that so many of us are feeling in our country, in our world? So just what brings you here today? And, could have to do with listening, or it could absolutely be, just what brings you back to the Women Together community, or maybe here for the first time. But what brings you here today? And I'll just read a few out from the chat in both the Zoom room and the YouTube space as well. I love Helen, my weekly enlightened women time. Need for connection, an hour of peak and calm. Brings me into a space where I'm fully present for the hour. Carly, stillness, ritual. The topic of listening. Yolanda, goddess connection. New connections with other like-minded women, connection and mindfulness. My time to be here with others. Look forward to tips and direction of listening meaningfully. Need to reconnect with women in my house of men. Husband, 2 teen, and cat. Got it, Eileen. So need to reconnect with women when you've got a house full of men. I understand. Embracing community, unity, wonderful, comforting and supportive. Feeling I could listen more generously. First time, welcome, Mary. Connecting with others who are positive. Yeah. Family problems seem to happen on Tuesdays. Crazy stuff. Happy to make a connection with others. Marlene, we're with you, and I wonder if that's why we scheduled it. Tuesdays for the family crazy, just to land us together. This experience is always so grounding for me. Love meeting such interesting women and sharing the stuff we never address. There are so many reasons, right, that we never address some of the things that should be, so common for us to be able to talk about. It should be easy for us to go there, but we either stay in this kind of shallow space or we don't go there. We just avoid. There's so many reasons, and it's wonderful to have this space for connection. Monica on YouTube, snowed in, miss seeing friends. Heal my heart. Thank you, Dr. Doreen. Yeah, I live alone, so great to connect with other women. We are here with you, many of us alone, many of us dealing with all types of people or beings around us that can either way be quite difficult. And also just a reminder that this is a space for both introvert and extrovert folks, people who are, coming from all different ends of what I see as a spectrum. Often people talk about ambiverts, being able to do both, but we found, and I mentioned this, I think last week, that it seems sometimes easier for introverts in this pandemic to just kind of be able to deal with this and not have to go out and not have to think of reasons and to cancel plans or, things that introverts we may have done before. And that it seems quite difficult for extroverts who, want to be connected and want to be talking with each other. And this is really an invitation. I bring this back up because this space of listening is a place for both. And this space of listening is an invitation to land those of us who really are more in a place of sitting back and really hearing and taking it in. And it's a place for people to be able to share, maybe who don't always get to share, and to kind of practice that in this safe space where you may be seated in your own space. You could easily turn off the computer, but you stay here and you stay with the conversation. So it can be a wonderful practice space. So we've been taking that time in a lot of different ways. So I'll talk a little bit about generous listening and where it comes from, and then we'll do a tiny practice of journaling and possibly a moment of being with the breath. And then we will get to the magic of the practice of doing that together. So there are 3 aspects of generous listening as I've kind of laid it out, but it's rooted in a concept of 4 levels of listening that come from Otto Scharmer, who's a senior lecturer at MIT, and he and Katrin Koffer wrote a book called Theory U. So if you want to learn more about this kind of style of listening and what his sort of breakdown of these 4 levels are, I will talk through them quickly, but there is a lot more information, which I'll also try and share on the Women Together conversation space. So the 4 levels of listening that he talks about are downloading. So that's listening for what we already know. And oftentimes for me, that's reconfirming an inner projection. So I'll talk a little bit more about that, but looking for reconfirming data, looking for things that I already know. And it might also be, I think about, when I was in school and I felt like I just kind of opened my brain, dump everything in, close it, regurgitate it on the test, and that's kind of the way I think about downloading. It's this moment of, okay, and obviously now we use that word all the time. It's like download it to the desktop or the hard drive. So we're quite familiar with this way of listening. And it has very much been the way that we have been taught to experience the world. And then there's also factual listening. So the second level of listening is called factual, and it's looking for disconfirming data. So Otto at one point has talked about it as kind of going to the window. So in this moment here, I am maybe in my downloading space. I only see my own, my own stuff, and I only, like I take it in, I put it out, but that's it. Factual, I start looking. I go to the window and I start looking for other facts, and that might be disconfirming data. That might be something that I didn't necessarily know was true or believe to be true, but I'll look for a fact and I'll say, oh, okay, that's something outside of my realm of possibility. So I look for the facts. The next level of listening is empathic listening. Empathic listening requires us to see the situation through the eyes of another. And I feel like with this group of our Women Together crew, I don't need to explain empathic listening too much, just a reminder of it. But it's often the time where we sort of step into someone else's shoes. We can kind of recall an experience where we felt what that person feels, or, we can feel that. And even, it's beyond the kind of downloading of my own projection or really just listening to the data. It's really feeling with the heart, this space of what's coming up. We see someone sad, and we can touch into that with our own heart, our own experience. We sort of drop in. So, we move from the mind place into the heart. And Otto describes a fourth level of listening, and they call it generative listening. And this one is not as easy to explain, but it is, it's something that I think we've all felt at certain points in our lives. And generative listening is about really listening for the possibilities. So sometimes it's listening beyond the words, it's listening beyond the feelings, it's listening beyond the body language, it's listening to the space in the middle, the place of possibility. So often if you're creating something with someone, or you're, or even creating something with yourself, you're listening beyond your kind of past experience and your own, idea of what you want. You're really dropping into a different level of listening, which they call generative listening, and really connecting with what's possible. So I've been training with Otto and many others in the Presencing Institute for a few years, or a number of years. And Karen just put some of the notes of what I just shared, although that's just my notes there. But I've been training with them for quite some time. And, Otto, when he was doing some of the research for this book, he interviewed a number of CEOs. And when I have heard and seen Otto and Eileen connected, I recognize that Otto is articulating a way that Eileen often operates. So her way of being is what Otto really articulated and in his book, and obviously he didn't write it based totally on her, but there's definitely an element of him looking at how do people like Eileen operate in the world, and how do we want to show up based on that. And what would really be needed to shift he calls it source of operating, but it's really thinking about how do we actually, not just operate from the mind or the heart or, one part of ourselves, but how do we activate and open each of those parts so that we can do these different levels of listening. So I can share more of that information, but I just wanted to give a little touch into some of that, articulated science of listening, and bring that into what we carry as kind of 3 principles of generous listening. So we want to move beyond. The first one is we want to move beyond listening to our own inner projection. So often in Women Together events, I've talked about this, and I think about it as, if I'm listening to a story, and Diane, I've probably used this, I've probably said it as using your name before, but I just happened to see you on the screen. So if Diane were telling me about her mother, and she's giving me a story about her mother, and I'm, listening and taking it in, but really I'm hearing the story of my own mother. And I'm really just hearing like, oh yeah, Diane, I know exactly what you're talking about, because that's, I had that experience with my mom. That's just me listening to my own inner projection. That's listening to my own, and oh yeah, this is what you need to do. Let me tell you, I can, I know exactly, and then the advice comes out, and then we're done. That's it. We don't need to do anything else anymore. And the reality is that that's not it. That's not, that's not the end of the story. And often that's what creates this kind of close down. People, if someone said that to me, I would just say, okay, thanks. And I would go about my day. And I don't know that I would come back to them to talk about much of anything other than, probably the weather or something like that. But really moving beyond this inner projection and really dropping it. So that means opening the mind. And then the second aspect of this is listening and hearing what's there. And that's where, we kind of, for me, I kind of combine the factual and empathic a little bit to just really listen to what's actually there. And that could be the words, that could be the heart space, that could be, beyond the words. I love that people said that the silence between the words. So really just listening to what's actually there, what's present. And that could also be internally within ourselves. Sometimes we have this kind of chatty mind going, and there's, oh, I should do this, and I have this, and da, da, da. And what happens when we kind of shut that off and we just get present to what's here? So listening to what's there. And then the third one that I think about, which is really around generative listening, is listening to what's possible. And that's where I think listening becomes a gift. Because when we can reflect that back to each other, our conversation moves from advice giving to really mirroring back and really hearing not just, oh, I heard you say XYZ, but really mirroring back, wow, I can't imagine what that must have been like for you. And it seems like that was a really hard experience. And just being with a person in that place of possibility of what might come through, that can be an incredible gift, not just for the person that's being heard, but for the listener ourselves too. Because we might see something in our own stories and our own experience that we didn't, we couldn't have imagined. So there are a few different principles, and I'll just repeat them one more time because I know, sometimes repetition is the key to learning. And for me, every time I repeat it, I feel like I learn it again. So just listening beyond our own projection, listening to hear what's really there, and listening to what's possible. Those for me are the ways that I've experienced generous listening and I've experienced being heard. So what I'd like us to do is to move into a tiny practice, and some of you may have done this with me before. We'll do just 5 short journaling questions. And I just spoke a lot, so a lot of it's in the head right now, and this is how we move it into the hands. This is how we move it and integrate into the body, is by actually getting the pen on the paper and feeling it, the thoughts move through our hands. That starts the process of integration. It's like digestion. Um, so the first question, and the key to journaling, is just keeping the pen on the paper, even if you don't know what to say. That's okay. So the first question is around the listening tool of empathy. So think of a time when you listened to someone with empathy. What was it like to step into their shoes? So again, think of a time when you listened to someone with empathy. What was it like to step into their shoes? And it could be feelings or sensations. Could be draining. That's okay too. And the second question is, think of a time when you experienced being heard by someone who was listening with empathy. What did it feel like to be heard in that way? So, again, think of a time when you experienced being heard by someone who was listening with empathy. What did it feel like to be heard in that way? The next question is moving into the generative listening space. And the places where I've experienced generative listening have been, I mentioned creativity, but they've also been at a place where I've been seen, or someone has seen me at my highest potential. So they've seen the possibility in me that I might not even see yet. I might not even know is there. And sometimes that's a teacher, sometimes it's a parent or someone who, cares deeply about you. But when they look at you, they don't just see that current moment, they see your highest potential. They see the possibility. So for a moment, think of a time when someone saw you at your highest potential. What did it feel like? And I also think about that as a seed or seedling, and you can just see the flower, the fruit that it's going to become. And that's where also the generative word comes in for me as well too. But where do you see, where have you been seen at your highest potential? What did that feel like? And the last question, I'll stick with 4 today, is what are the ways that you experience seeing someone else at their highest potential? So, what are the ways that you experience seeing someone else at their highest potential? And then when you've completed your journaling, I'll give it another minute, but you can just put your pen down and look up and smile because I'm going through the gallery. And this is how I collect my smiles for the day. Wonderful. So, before we go into breakouts, I'd like to just invite us to take a breath together and to just land back in ourselves and back in this experience of the journaling. And before we go into a space where we connect with each other and we practice this experience of generous listening, just applying that to ourselves first and applying that to our own experience. So perhaps if you'd like to, you can join me in putting one hand on the belly and one hand on the heart. And you can begin to exhale everything out and inhale, fill the belly, fill the chest and the collarbones. And just deepen the breath. And exhale out, collarbones, chest, belly. And just notice what's here in this body. And as you listen to what's here, also listening for what's possible. When you're ready, you can release your hands. You can open your eyes. And I just feel that it's also on the Groundhog's Day when we know that spring may come again, to follow these little threads of possibility can be really important for ourselves and for each other. So we're going to turn to each other from this place of listening and just attend to the quality of our own listening. And that doesn't mean going into the room and just being silent with each other, or jumping right in, but just really listening to what wants to be shared. So we'll go in for 20 minutes, and we will have about we'll have each have time to share. So we'll have about 4 or 5 people in each room. And that should give at least a few minutes to be able to share with one another just anything that came up. What happens for you when you listen to that place of possibility? and just share with one another your name, where you're coming from, and what comes up for you in that question. We'll see you back here in about 20 minutes. And for those of you on YouTube, we'll see you in the conversation space until next week. So enjoy the breakouts. We'll see you back here soon.